The wagon lurched to a stop in front of the dusty general store, and Violet Norwood could hear the distinct, familiar hum of 20,000 bees settling uneasily in their wooden boxes behind her, their agitation matching her own thundering heartbeat as she faced the harsh reality that her intended husband had died 3 days before her arrival in Florence, Arizona territory. The telegram had reached the station master just minutes before her wagon pulled into town, and now she sat frozen on the buckboard seat while the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on her bonnet. It was May of 1885, and she had traveled nearly 2,000 miles from Pennsylvania with nothing but her deceased father's beehives, her mother's wedding dress packed carefully in her trunk, and a heart full of desperate hope that had just shattered like fine china hitting a stone floor. "Miss Norwood," a deep voice cut through her shock. "I am Deputy Marshal Derek Navarro. I'm afraid I have some difficult news to share with you." Violet looked down at the man standing beside her wagon. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of coffee. His face was weathered from the sun, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though his expression now was grave and sympathetic. She guessed him to be around 30 years old, perhaps a few years younger. "I have already received the news," she managed to say, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. "Mr. Peterson is deceased." "Yes, madam, I am very sorry. He was kicked by a horse while working at the livery." It was quick, if that provides any comfort. Derek removed his hat respectfully. "Do you have family back east who might send for you?" The question hung in the air between them while the bees hummed louder, sensing her distress through some ancient instinct. Violet gripped the reins tighter, her knuckles turning white. "No. My father passed last winter. My mother died when I was 16. I have no one." The admission cost her what remained of her composure, and she felt tears threatening to spill over. She had sold everything to pay for this journey, had convinced herself that starting fresh in the Arizona territory would give her life new purpose. Henry Peterson's letters had been kind, if not particularly romantic, and she had allowed herself to believe in the possibility of building something good with him. Now that dream was gone, and she was stranded in a town where she knew no one, with barely enough money to survive a week. "What are those buzzing sounds?" Derek asked, stepping closer to the wagon and peering into the back. "My bees. I brought 6 hives with me. My father was a beekeeper, and I learned the trade from him. I thought perhaps Mr. Peterson and I could start a honey business together. He mentioned in his letters that honey was scarce out here and fetched good prices." Derek's eyebrows rose with interest. "You know how to keep bees?" "I have been keeping them since I was 12 years old. I can handle them, harvest honey, make candles and salves. My father supplied half of Lancaster County before he died." There was pride in her voice despite her current circumstances. The deputy marshal studied her face for a long moment, and Violet found herself unable to look away from his steady gaze. There was something solid about him, something that made her feel fractionally less adrift in her sea of troubles. "Miss Norwood, I cannot solve all your problems today, but I can help with the immediate ones. There is a boarding house 2 streets over run by Mrs. Abigail Sutton. She is a decent woman, a widow herself, and she keeps clean rooms at fair prices. Let me escort you there, and you can get settled while you figure out your next steps." "I appreciate the kindness, Marshal Navarro, but I must think about my bees. They have been traveling for weeks and need to be properly situated. They require a good location with water nearby and flowering plants." Derek replaced his hat and gave her what might have been the ghost of a smile. "I think I might know a place, but first, let us get you settled at Mrs. Sutton's establishment. Your bees will be fine in their boxes for another few hours, will they not?" Violet nodded reluctantly. Yes, if we park the wagon in the shade and make sure they have adequate ventilation. Then it is decided. Derek moved to help her down from the wagon seat, and when his hands closed around her waist to lift her down, Violet felt an unexpected jolt of awareness that had nothing to do with her precarious situation, and everything to do with the strength in his grip and the gentleness in his touch. Her feet touched the ground, and she stepped back quickly, smoothing her dusty traveling dress with trembling hands. She had not expected to feel anything like attraction today, not with her world crumbling around her ears. It felt wrong, somehow, to notice the way the afternoon sunlight caught in Derek's dark hair or the way his mouth curved when he looked at her. "I will drive the wagon," Derek said, already climbing up to the seat. "You can walk alongside if you prefer or ride. It is not far." Violet climbed back up, too exhausted to care about propriety. They rode in silence through Florence's main street, and she took in her surroundings with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The town was smaller than she had imagined, with false-fronted buildings lining a wide dirt road. Men in dusty clothes watched their passage with open interest, and she felt the weight of their stares like physical things. The boarding house was a 2-story adobe structure with a covered porch and window boxes that held struggling geraniums. Mrs. Sutton turned out to be a plump woman in her 50s with shrewd eyes and a surprisingly kind smile. "A mail-order bride for poor Henry Peterson," she said after Derek explained the situation. "What a terrible tragedy. Of course you can stay here, dear. I have a room on the second floor that catches the evening breeze. It is not fancy, but it is clean." "I can pay," Violet said quickly, not wanting charity. "At least for a week or two, until I determine what to do next." Mrs. Sutton waved a hand dismissively. "We will work out the details later." "You look dead on your feet, child. When did you last eat?" The question made Violet realize she could not remember. "Yesterday morning, I think, at the last way station." "Unacceptable. Come inside and I will fix you something. Derek, be a dear and bring her trunk in, would you?" The deputy marshal did as requested while Mrs. Sutton hustled Violet into a surprisingly cool dining room and began preparing a plate of cold chicken, bread, and pickled vegetables. Violet tried to protest that she was not hungry, but her stomach betrayed her with a loud rumble that made Mrs. Sutton laugh. "Eat, child. Everything looks better on a full stomach." Derek returned, setting her trunk down gently in the hallway. "I will take your wagon over to my property and see about getting those bees settled. You can come see the setup tomorrow when you are rested." "Your property?" Violet stood abruptly. "Marshal Navarro, I cannot impose on you like that. You have already done too much." "You are not imposing. I have 40 acres about 2 miles outside town near the Gila River. There is plenty of flowering desert plants this time of year and water access. It would be a good location for bees, and honestly, I would be interested in learning more about beekeeping myself. Henry Peterson was right that honey fetches good prices out here. It might be a profitable venture. You want to go into business with me?" Violet could not keep the skepticism from her voice. She had just met this man, and he was already offering her more help than she had any right to expect. Derek met her eyes squarely. "I am offering you a place to keep your bees and the possibility of a business arrangement that might benefit us both. You need income, and I have land that is not being used to its full potential. Think about it, Miss Norwood. But for now, let me get your hive settled before those bees decide to swarm." He left before she could formulate a response, and Violet sank back into her chair, her mind spinning. Mrs. Sutton patted her shoulder sympathetically. "Derek Navarro is one of the good ones," the older woman said. "Lost his wife and baby daughter to fever about 5 years back. He has been alone ever since, just working and keeping to himself mostly. But he has a good heart, that one. If he says he will help you, you can count on it." The information settled over Violet like a heavy blanket. So Derek was a widower, carrying his own grief. Perhaps that explained the understanding in his eyes when he looked at her, the recognition of someone else who had lost everything and was trying to build something new from the ruins. She ate mechanically, barely tasting the food while Mrs. Sutton chattered on about the town and its inhabitants. Apparently Florence had been established as a farming community along the Gila River, with about 800 residents. It was the county seat of Pinal County, with a courthouse, several stores, saloons, and even a small newspaper. The surrounding area was a mixture of ranches, farms, and mining claims. "We have all sorts here," Mrs. Sutton explained. "White folks, Mexicans, some Chinese workers from the railroad, and the Pima Indians have a reservation not far from here. It is not as wild as it was 10 years ago, but we still get our share of trouble. That is why we need good lawmen like Derek." After the meal, Mrs. Sutton showed Violet to her room, which was indeed small but scrupulously clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that overlooked the street. Violet collapsed onto the bed fully clothed and fell into an exhausted sleep that was haunted by dreams of buzzing wings and dark eyes the color of coffee. She woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of roosters crowing somewhere in the distance. For a moment, she could not remember where she was, and then reality came crashing back. She was in Florence, Arizona territory. Her intended husband was dead. She was alone except for her bees and the unexpected kindness of a stranger. Violet washed her face in the basin, changed into a fresh dress, and went downstairs to find Mrs. Sutton already preparing breakfast for her boarders. There were 3 other residents, all men who worked at various businesses in town. They ate quickly and left, tipping their hats to Violet with obvious curiosity. "Derek sent word that he will come by at 9 to take you out to see your bees," Mrs. Sutton said, pouring coffee into a chipped mug. "That gives you about an hour to eat and make yourself presentable." "Mrs. Sutton, I need to discuss payment with you. I have some money, but not much. I was hoping to find work in town, perhaps selling honey once I can get the hives producing, but that will take time." The older woman sat down across from her with a thoughtful expression. "Can you cook?" "Yes, fairly well." "Can you clean?" "Of course." "Then here is my proposal. You help me with the cooking and cleaning for my boarders, and I will reduce your room rate to almost nothing. Whatever money you make from your honey business will be yours to keep. When you get on your feet properly, we can renegotiate. How does that sound?" Relief flooded through Violet so powerfully that her eyes stung with tears. "That sounds more than fair. Thank you, Mrs. Sutton. You are very kind. Posh, I am practical. Good help is hard to find, and you look like a girl who knows how to work. Besides, I like you. You have got backbone, coming all this way by yourself. That takes courage." Derek arrived promptly at 9, driving a buckboard rather than riding horseback. He looked different in the morning light, less intimidating somehow, though no less attractive. He wore simple work clothes rather than his Deputy Marshal uniform, and his smile when he saw her was warm and genuine. "Good morning, Miss Norwood. Are you ready to check on your bees?" "Please, call me Violet. And yes, I am very anxious to see how they fared the night." The ride out to his property took about 30 minutes, following a rough track that paralleled the Gila River. Violet was surprised by the landscape, so different from Pennsylvania's green hills and forests. Here everything was browns and golds, with strange plants she could not name dotting the desert. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and hazy in the morning light. "It is beautiful," she said, surprising herself. I expected it to be more desolate. Most people do, Derek replied. But the desert has its own beauty once you learn to see it. This time of year, after the spring rains, there are wildflowers everywhere. The palo verde trees have yellow blossoms, and the ocotillo puts out red flowers. Your bees should do well. His property came into view. A modest adobe house with a barn, a corral holding several horses, and what looked like a large vegetable garden. He had already positioned her wagon under a cottonwood tree near a small irrigation ditch that ran from the river. I gave them some sugar water last night, Derek said as they approached the hives. I hope that was the right thing to do. They seemed agitated. Violet examined the hives quickly, her practiced eye taking in their condition. You did exactly right. They are settled now. I can start transferring them to permanent locations today if you truly meant what you said about letting me keep them here. I meant it. Derek helped her down from the buckboard. I have been thinking about the business arrangement. I propose that you keep the bees here on my land. I will help with whatever heavy labor you need, building hive stands, that sort of thing. In return, I would like to learn the trade, and we split the profits from honey sales 60-40, with you getting the larger share since you are providing the expertise and doing most of the work. Violet turned to face him fully. Why are you doing this? You do not know me at all. Derek was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. When my wife Maria died, people in this town helped me in ways I can never repay. Mrs. Sutton brought me meals for months. The blacksmith refused payment for shoeing my horses. The doctor would not take money for tending to Maria or our daughter, even though there was nothing he could do for them in the end. I learned that sometimes people help because it is the right thing to do, and because we are all just trying to get through this life without being alone in our struggles. His honesty took her breath away. I am sorry for your loss. Mrs. Sutton told me about your family. It was 5 years ago. The grief does not go away, but it gets easier to carry. He met her eyes. I imagine you know something about that, losing both your parents. Yes. The simple acknowledgement hung between them, a shared understanding that required no further words. They spent the rest of the morning setting up the hives in optimal locations. Derek proved to be a quick learner, listening carefully as Violet explained the intricacies of bee behavior and hive management. He was not afraid of the bees, though he approached them with healthy respect, and he seemed genuinely fascinated by the way the colonies functioned. Each hive has a queen, Violet explained as they worked. She is the mother of all the other bees, and the workers' entire purpose is to serve her and the colony. The drones mate with queens from other hives, and the workers do everything else, from gathering nectar to building comb to defending the hive. How do you keep from getting stung? Slow movements, no sudden sounds, and working with them during the warmest part of the day when they are most docile. And smoke helps calm them. She demonstrated with her father's old smoker, puffing gentle clouds of white smoke across the entrance of one hive. It masks the alarm pheromones they release when they sense danger. By midday, all 6 hives were established in a small grove of cottonwood trees, with easy access to both the irrigation ditch and the desert flowers beyond. Violet felt a sense of peace settle over her as she watched the bees beginning to orient themselves to their new home, flying in widening circles to memorize the location. They will start foraging soon, she said. Within a week, they should be bringing in nectar and pollen. If the flow is good, we might be able to harvest some honey by July. Derek stood beside her, his arms crossed over his chest, watching the bees with evident satisfaction. You really know your business. Your father taught you well. He was a good teacher, patient. He always said that beekeeping requires humility because the bees will always surprise you, no matter how much you think you know. Violet smiled at the memory. "I miss him terribly, but I am glad to have this connection to him still." "Will you stay for lunch?" Derek asked. "I am not much of a cook, but I can manage beans and cornbread." Violet hesitated, aware that spending more time alone with him was probably not proper, but Mrs. Sutton had packed her only a small breakfast and she was hungry. "That would be nice, thank you." His kitchen was tidy if sparse, with basic furnishings and little in the way of decoration. Violet noticed there were no photographs, no mementos, nothing to suggest a woman had ever lived there. Derek had apparently stripped away all reminders of his lost family, and she wondered if that made the grief easier or harder to bear. The meal was simple but filling, and they ate mostly in comfortable silence. Afterward, Derek drove her back to town, and they made arrangements for her to return 3 times a week to tend the bees. "You should probably get a horse," he said as they pulled up in front of Mrs. Sutton's boarding house. "It would make the trip easier than waiting for me to drive you." "I cannot afford a horse right now, but perhaps eventually if the honey sales go well." Derek nodded thoughtfully. "I have a mare that is getting older, too old for hard work but perfectly fine for riding. You could borrow her until you get on your feet." "You are too generous, Marshal Navarro." "Derek, and I am being practical. If you are my business partner, I need you to be able to get to the hives when necessary. Consider it an investment." Over the following weeks, Violet settled into a routine that was exhausting but satisfying. She spent her mornings helping Mrs. Sutton with cooking and cleaning, her afternoons tending the bees, and her evenings learning everything she could about Florence and its inhabitants. The town fascinated her with its mixture of cultures and peoples. She met farmers who irrigated their fields with water from the Gila River, ranchers who ran cattle in the surrounding desert, miners who worked silver and copper claims in the nearby mountains. There were tensions, certainly, between different groups, but there was also a sense of everyone being in the same struggle against the harsh environment. Derek became a regular presence in her life, though always respectful of propriety. He helped her build additional hive stands when she mentioned wanting to split one of the colonies that was growing too large. He rode out with her when she needed to check on the bees in the evening. He taught her about the desert plants, which ones the bees favored, which ones were poisonous, which ones could be eaten or used for medicine. She learned that he had been born in California to a Mexican mother and an American father, that he spoke both Spanish and English fluently, that he had come to Arizona Territory after his wife's death because he needed distance from the memories. He was patient, thoughtful, and surprisingly funny when he relaxed enough to let his guard down. Violet found herself thinking about him at odd moments, wondering what he was doing, whether he had eaten properly, if he was lonely in that empty house. She told herself it was natural concern for a friend and business partner, but she knew she was lying to herself. The realization that she was falling in love with Derek Navarro came on a Tuesday afternoon in mid-June. They were inspecting one of the hives together, and he was holding a frame of honeycomb up to the light, marveling at the perfect hexagonal cells. "It is like architecture," he said. "The way they build these cells all the same size, all fitting together perfectly. How do they know how to do this?" Instinct. Generations upon generations of knowledge built into them somehow. Violet watched his face, the concentration in his expression, the gentle way he held the frame so as not to damage the delicate wax. They are remarkable creatures. Derek looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them that was too powerful to ignore. His eyes dropped to her lips, and she felt heat flood through her body, despite the afternoon sun already making her sweat. "Violet," he said softly, and the way he said her name made her knees weak. But then a bee landed on his hand, and the moment was broken. He carefully set the frame back in the hive, and they finished the inspection in silence that hummed with unspoken words. That evening, back at the boarding house, Violet found herself unable to concentrate on anything. Mrs. Sutton noticed and cornered her in the kitchen after supper. "You have feelings for Derek," the older woman said bluntly. It was not a question. Violet could not deny it. "Is it wrong? Henry Peterson has not even been dead 2 months. You never met Henry Peterson. You do not owe his memory anything. And Derek Navarro is a good man who has been alone too long. If you two are finding comfort in each other, I see no harm in it. But what if he does not feel the same way? What if I am reading too much into simple kindness?" Mrs. Sutton laughed. "Child, that man looks at you like you hung the moon. The whole town is talking about it. The only question is which one of you is going to be brave enough to say something first." The conversation left Violet flustered and hopeful in equal measure. She lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling and imagining what it would be like to be kissed by Derek, to be held by him, to build a life with him. The next morning, Derek appeared at the boarding house earlier than usual, his expression troubled. "There is a problem with the bees," he said without preamble. "I rode past them at dawn and one of the hives is gone." Violet's heart sank. "Gone? What do you mean gone? Stolen?" "The whole hive box, taken sometime during the night." They rode out to his property immediately, and Derek was right. One of the 6 hives had vanished completely, leaving only the stand it had sat upon. Violet examined the area carefully, looking for clues. "There are wagon tracks," she said, pointing to the faint impressions in the dirt. "Whoever took it knew what they were doing. They must have sealed the entrance at night when all the bees were inside, then loaded the whole hive into a wagon. But who would do this? And why?" Violet shook her head, anger and frustration warring inside her. A beehive is valuable. The bees themselves, the comb, the stored honey. Someone who knows about beekeeping could make good money from a stolen hive. Derek's jaw tightened. "I will investigate. This is theft, plain and simple, and it happened on my property. I take that personally." Over the next few days, Derek questioned everyone in the area, but no one had seen or heard anything suspicious. Whoever had taken the hive had been careful and professional. Violet tried not to let it discourage her, but the loss stung, both financially and emotionally. To make matters worse, a dry spell set in, and the desert flowers began to wither. The bees' honey production slowed, and Violet worried they would not have enough surplus to harvest and sell. The dream of financial independence seemed to be slipping further away, but Derek refused to let her sink into despair. He brought her gifts of flowering plants he found in the mountains, transplanting them near the hives. He built a small shade structure over the irrigation ditch to keep the water cool and attractive to the bees. He spent hours with her, learning everything he could about beekeeping, until she realized he was not just interested in the business but in spending time with her. One evening in late June, as they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Derek finally said what had been building between them for weeks. "Violet, I need to tell you something." Her heart began to race. "Yes, I care about you. More than I should, probably, given how we met and the circumstances. But I cannot help it. These past 2 months, getting to know you, working with you, they have been the happiest I have been in 5 years. You make me want to think about the future again instead of just surviving each day." Violet turned to face him fully, her eyes searching his. "I care about you too, Derek. I did not expect to, did not plan for it, but I cannot deny it anymore. You have been so kind to me, so generous, and somewhere along the way, kindness turned into something deeper." Derek reached for her hand, his calloused fingers closing around hers with exquisite gentleness. I know it has not been long. I know people might talk, but I would like to court you properly if you would allow it. I want to see where this might lead." "Yes," Violet breathed. "Yes, I would like that very much." He smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his whole face, and Violet felt her heart expand with something that felt dangerously close to joy. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles with old-fashioned courtliness that made her blush. From that moment, everything changed and nothing changed. Derek was still helpful and kind, but now there was open affection in his gaze, gentle touches that lingered, conversations that stretched long into the evening. He brought her small gifts, a comb carved from mesquite wood, a shawl in soft blue wool, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy. Violet bloomed under his attention like the desert flowers after rain. She caught herself humming while she worked, smiling for no reason, daydreaming about a future that suddenly seemed bright with possibility. Mrs. Sutton was delighted by the development, and made herself a shameless accomplice in their courtship, inviting Derek to dinner frequently and finding reasons to leave them alone together in the parlor afterward. The town gossips had their say, of course, muttering about the unseemly haste of it all, but most people were supportive. Derek was well liked in Florence, and Violet had earned respect through her work ethic and friendly demeanor. In mid-July, they finally harvested honey from the remaining 5 hives. Violet had been conservative in her estimates, taking only the surplus and leaving plenty for the bees themselves. But even so, they extracted nearly 100 pounds of golden honey that tasted of mesquite and desert wildflowers. Derek built a wooden press to help extract the honey from the comb, and they worked together in his kitchen, hot and sticky and laughing as honey dripped everywhere despite their best efforts. At one point, Violet looked up to find Derek watching her with such open love in his eyes that she forgot to breathe. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "You have honey in your hair," he said, reaching out to gently remove a drop from a curl that had escaped her bun. His fingers lingered against her cheek, and Violet leaned into the touch without thinking. Derek's breath caught, and then he was leaning down, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she wanted to. She did not want to. Their first kiss was sweet and sticky with honey, tentative, and then increasingly confident as they learned the shape of each other's mouths. Derek's arms came around her waist, pulling her close, and Violet wrapped her arms around his neck, rising on her toes to deepen the kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Derek rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Violet Norwood. I did not think I would ever say those words to anyone again, but I love you." "I love you too," Violet whispered, joy flooding through her so powerfully she felt she might burst with it. "I love you, Derek Navarro." They stood there for a long moment, just holding each other, the afternoon sun slanting through the kitchen window and the scent of honey thick in the air. Violet felt like she had finally come home after a long, difficult journey. The honey sold quickly in Florence and the surrounding ranches. Desert honey was rare and prized, and Violet's careful harvesting had produced a product that was clear and golden and delicious. Within a week, they had sold every jar she had managed to fill, and there were orders for more. "We could expand," Derek suggested one evening as they sat on his porch watching the stars emerge. "Get more hives, maybe even breed queens to sell. There is definitely a market for it." "That would require investment," Violet said practically. "More equipment, more time, and we would need to find who stole that hive before they strike again." Derek's expression darkened. "I have not forgotten about that. I have been keeping my ears open, asking questions." "Someone knows something. They always do. It is just a matter of finding the right person to talk to." The break in the case came from an unexpected source. One of the Chinese railroad workers who had stayed in Florence after the line was completed approached Derek in town one afternoon, speaking in halting English about a man trying to sell honeycomb at the Chinese camp. Derek questioned the worker carefully, learning that a white man named Jack Sullivan had shown up 3 weeks ago with a beehive and honey to sell. Sullivan was known as a drifter and occasional thief, though he had never been caught at anything serious enough to warrant arrest. "Do you know where I can find Sullivan?" Derek asked. The worker gave directions to a small camp about 10 miles south of town, near the river. Derek thanked him and immediately sought out Violet to tell her the news. "I am going after him," Derek said. "If it is our hive, I will get it back." "I am coming with you," Violet insisted. "It could be dangerous. Sullivan might not come quietly." "Those are my bees, Derek. I am coming." They set out the next morning at dawn, both of them armed, Derek with his pistol and rifle, Violet with the small derringer her father had given her for protection. The ride to Sullivan's camp took several hours through rough terrain, and they approached cautiously, not wanting to spook him into running. The camp was a ramshackle affair, a tent and a small fire pit. The stolen hive sat under a mesquite tree, and Violet felt anger surge through her at the sight of it. Derek dismounted and approached the tent while Violet hung back, her hand on the derringer in her pocket. "Jack Sullivan," Derek called out. "I am Deputy Marshal Navarro. I need to speak with you about stolen property." A man emerged from the tent, unshaven and bleary-eyed, probably in his 40s. He took one look at Derek's badge and bolted, running toward a horse tethered nearby. Derek was faster. He tackled Sullivan before the man reached his mount, and they went down in a tangle of limbs and cursing. Violet watched anxiously as they struggled, but Derek was younger and stronger, and he soon had Sullivan pinned and cuffed. "You have no proof I stole anything," Sullivan spat. "That hive has my mark on it," Violet said coldly, approaching to point at the small V she had carved into the bottom corner of the hive box. "See, that proves it is mine." Sullivan's face fell. "It was just sitting there. I thought it was abandoned." "On private property in the middle of the night. Try again." Derek hauled him to his feet. "You are under arrest for theft. We will let the judge decide your sentence." They loaded the hive carefully into Derek's wagon, relieved to see the colony seemed healthy despite their ordeal. Sullivan rode back to Florence with his hands tied to Derek's saddle horn, complaining the entire way. The judge sentenced Sullivan to 6 months in jail and ordered him to pay restitution. Violet felt a sense of justice being served, though she knew the money would be slow in coming if it came at all. But more importantly, the recovery of the hive felt like a turning point. That evening, Derek asked Violet to take a walk with him along the river. The sun was setting, painting the water gold and pink, and the air was finally cooling from the day's fierce heat. "Violet, these past few months have changed my life," Derek began, taking her hand as they walked. "You came here with nothing but your bees and your courage, and you have built something remarkable. But more than that, you have brought light back into my world. I did not think I deserved to be happy again after losing Maria and Alina, but you make me believe in second chances." Violet's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Derek." He stopped and turned to face her, reaching into his pocket to pull out a small box. "I know it has only been a few months. I know some people will say we should wait longer. But I am 32 years old, and I have learned that life is too short and too uncertain to waste time when you find something precious. Violet Norwood, will you marry me?" He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band set with a small turquoise stone. It was not expensive or elaborate, but it was beautiful in its simplicity, and Violet loved it immediately. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you." Derek slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he was kissing her, deep and passionate, his arms wrapped tight around her as if he would never let her go. Violet kissed him back with everything she had, pouring all her love and hope and dreams into that embrace. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning like fools, Derek laughed with pure joy. "We should probably tell Mrs. Sutton before the whole town hears about it through the gossip mill." Mrs. Sutton was, predictably, overjoyed by their news. She immediately began planning the wedding, recruiting half the women in Florence to help with preparations. The ceremony would be held at the small Catholic church on the edge of town, with a reception at the boarding house afterward. Violet wrote to distant cousins in Pennsylvania, informing them of her engagement, but she did not expect them to make the journey for the wedding. The people of Florence had become her family now, and that felt right. The wedding took place on a Saturday morning in late August, when the worst of the summer heat had begun to ease. Violet wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame, and carried a bouquet of desert wildflowers that Derek had picked himself. She walked down the aisle of the small church to where Derek waited, impossibly handsome in a new suit, his eyes shining with love and maybe a few tears. The priest performed the ceremony in both English and Spanish, honoring Derek's heritage, and when he finally pronounced them husband and wife, Derek kissed her with such tenderness that Violet felt tears spill down her own cheeks. The reception was a joyful affair, with more food than 50 people could possibly eat and music provided by a local fiddle player. They danced together as the sun set, Derek holding her close and whispering how beautiful she was, how happy he was, how much he loved her. That night, Derek carried her over the threshold of his house, which was now their house. He had spent the past week preparing for her arrival, adding curtains to the windows, buying new bedding, building shelves for her books and belongings. It was clear he wanted her to feel at home, wanted this to be their space together. Their wedding night was sweet and nervous and ultimately wonderful. Derek was patient and gentle, mindful of her inexperience, and Violet felt herself falling even more deeply in love with this man who treated her like something precious. In the morning, she woke to find him watching her with a soft smile, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her bare shoulder. "Good morning, Mrs. Navarro." "Good morning, husband." She tested the word, liking the sound of it. They spent their first days as a married couple settling into their new life together. Violet moved her belongings from the boarding house, transforming Derek's spare space into a real home. She hung photographs, arranged wildflowers in old bottles, cooked meals that filled the house with delicious smells. Derek marveled at the transformation, confessing that he had not realized how empty the house had been until she filled it with her presence. They worked together on the Beehives, expanding the operation as planned, and the business thrived under their combined efforts. By October, they had 12 hives and were making plans to purchase more in the spring. The honey sales provided steady income, supplementing Derek's marshal salary, and for the first time in her life, Violet felt financially secure. But more than that, she felt happy. Derek was an attentive husband, always considerate of her needs, always ready with a smile or a kiss or a helping hand. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other's stories, sharing their dreams for the future. In November, Violet realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be sure, and then approached Derek one evening as he sat reading by the fireplace. "I have something to tell you," she said, her heart racing with nervous excitement. He looked up, immediately alert to her tone. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong. Quite the opposite, actually. Derek, I am with child. We are going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her, his face cycling through shock, fear, and then pure, radiant joy. He stood and crossed to her, taking her face in his hands with exquisite gentleness. "A baby," he whispered. "Violet, are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. But all the signs are there. I think the baby will come sometime in late June or early July." Derek pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, and she felt his whole body shaking. When he pulled back, there were tears on his cheeks. "I am terrified," he admitted. "After losing Alina and Maria, the thought of going through that again." "I know," Violet said, touching his face. "I am scared too, but we cannot let fear rob us of joy. We have to trust that everything will be all right." He nodded, taking a shaky breath. "You are right. And I will do everything in my power to take care of you and this baby. I swear it." True to his word, Derek became almost obsessively protective as Violet's pregnancy progressed. He insisted she stop doing any heavy work with the bees, taking over most of the hive management himself. He brought her water constantly, made sure she rested, worried over every small complaint. Violet found his concern both touching and occasionally frustrating, but she understood it came from a place of deep love and fear. She reassured him as best she could, staying healthy, following the doctor's advice, preparing for their child's arrival. The winter passed quietly, with cold nights and surprisingly cool days. Violet spent her time sewing baby clothes, reading everything she could find about infant care, and daydreaming about the little one growing inside her. Spring arrived with an explosion of wildflowers, and the bees responded enthusiastically, bringing in nectar by the gallon. Derek and Violet worked together when she felt up to it, tending the hives, harvesting early honey, planning their expansion. They had become a true partnership, both in business and in life. Derek valued her opinions on everything, from how to manage the ranch to what color to paint the baby's room. Violet felt respected and cherished in a way she had never experienced before. In late June, as the summer heat began to build, Violet's labor pains began. Derek immediately rode for the doctor and Mrs. Sutton, then paced the floor while the women took over his bedroom, shooing him out with firm instructions to boil water and stay out of the way. The labor was long and difficult, and Derek spent every minute of it in an agony of fear, remembering Maria's screams, the blood, the terrible silence when it was over. He prayed desperately, bargaining with God, promising anything if Violet and the baby would just survive. Finally, after 18 hours, he heard the lusty cry of a newborn baby. Mrs. Sutton emerged from the bedroom, beaming. "You have a son," she announced. "A big, healthy boy, and Violet is tired but fine. You can go in now." Derek nearly collapsed with relief. He entered the bedroom on shaking legs to find Violet propped up against pillows, exhausted but smiling, holding a bundle wrapped in soft blankets. "Meet your son," she said softly. Derek approached slowly, almost afraid to look, but when he saw the tiny face, the dark hair, the perfect little fingers, something in his chest cracked open. He reached out tentatively, and Violet placed the baby in his arms. "He is beautiful," Derek whispered, tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect. You are perfect. Violet, I love you so much. I love you too. What should we name him?" They had discussed names endlessly over the past months, but now, looking at his son's face, Derek knew exactly what felt right. Daniel Navarro. It means God is my judge. And his middle name should be Vincent, after your father. "Daniel Vincent Navarro," Violet repeated, smiling. "It is perfect." The first weeks with a newborn were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Daniel was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. Derek proved to be a devoted father, changing nappies without complaint, walking the floor with Daniel when he fussed, singing Spanish lullabies his own mother had taught him. Violet watched her husband with their son and fell in love with him all over again. He had been so afraid, so certain that tragedy would strike again, but instead he had been blessed with a second chance at fatherhood, and he embraced it with his whole heart. The beekeeping business continued to thrive. Derek managed most of the day-to-day work while Violet recovered from childbirth, and by late summer she was able to return to helping him. They had 20 hives now, producing honey faster than they could sell it locally. "We should think about expanding our market," Violet suggested one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset while Daniel slept in her arms. "There are silver mining camps in the mountains that would pay premium prices for honey, and Phoenix is growing fast. We could supply stores there." "That would mean longer trips away from home," Derek said thoughtfully. "But you might be right. We have outgrown the local market." They made their first trip to Phoenix in September, leaving Daniel with Mrs. Sutton and taking a wagon load of honey jars. The city was indeed growing, with new construction everywhere and stores eager for quality goods. They returned home with orders that would keep them busy through the winter and enough money to start planning serious expansion of their operation. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Derek continued his work as deputy marshal, though he took fewer dangerous assignments now that he had a family to think about. Violet managed the beekeeping business, which grew steadily as their reputation for quality honey spread throughout the territory. Daniel grew from a baby into a toddler, bright and curious and full of energy. He loved the bees, showing no fear as he toddled after his parents through the hives, and both Derek and Violet wondered if he would grow up to be a beekeeper himself. When Daniel was 2 years old, Violet discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, and Derek was less panicked, though still protective. Their second son, Thomas Matthew Navarro, was born in early spring of 1889, a smaller baby than Daniel had been but just as healthy. Derek held his new son and marveled that his life, which had seemed so empty and hopeless just a few years ago, was now full to overflowing with love and family. "I think we are building something good here," he told Violet as they lay in bed together, Thomas sleeping in a cradle beside them and Daniel in his own small bed across the room. "Not just the business, but this family, this life." "We are," Violet agreed, resting her head on his shoulder. "I think about the frightened girl who arrived in Florence 4 years ago with nothing but her bees and her grief, and I can hardly recognize her. You have given me so much, Derek. A home, a family, a future." "You gave me those things too," Derek said, kissing the top of her head. "We saved each other, I think." The years that followed were busy and happy. The beekeeping business expanded until they had over 50 hives scattered across Derek's property and several neighboring ranches. They hired help, teaching others the trade, creating jobs in the community. Derek eventually retired from his position as deputy marshal, focusing full-time on the honey business and his growing family. A third son, James Robert, was born in 1891, completing their family and filling the adobe house with laughter and chaos. Daniel grew into a serious boy who indeed loved the bees and spent hours with his mother learning the trade. Thomas was more adventurous, always exploring and getting into mischief. James was the baby, sweet and cuddly, content to follow his older brothers everywhere. Violet sometimes thought about the strange path that had brought her to this life. If Henry Peterson had not died, she would never have met Derek. If she had not brought her father's bees, she might have been forced to return to Pennsylvania in defeat. So many small decisions and accidents had led her here, to this exact place and time, and she was grateful for all of it, even the painful parts. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Derek surprised her with a gift. It was a photograph he had commissioned, showing their family in front of the house, with the beehives visible in the background. They all looked happy and healthy, frozen in time, a testament to everything they had built together. "So we never forget," Derek said. "So the boys can show their children someday and say, 'This is where it all began.'" With a mail-order bride who brought beehives and a cowboy who found sweetness in more than honey. Violet hugged him tight, overwhelmed with love for this man who had taken a chance on her, who had given her everything she had ever wanted and things she had not even known to dream of. "I love you," she said. "Today, tomorrow, always." "And I love you," Derek replied. "My sweet Violet. The best thing that ever happened to me." As they stood there together, their 3 sons playing nearby and the bees humming in their hives, Violet felt the deep contentment of a life well lived, and a love that had grown stronger with each passing year. She had come to the Arizona territory looking for a fresh start and had found a home, a family, and a love story sweeter than any honey her bees could ever make. The business continued to prosper over the years, becoming one of the most successful honey operations in the territory. When Arizona became a state in 1912, Navarro honey was already shipping products across the Southwest, with a reputation for quality that attracted buyers from as far away as California. Daniel, as expected, took over the beekeeping operation when he was old enough, bringing fresh ideas and innovations while respecting the traditions his mother had taught him. Thomas became a rancher, buying land adjacent to his father's property and raising cattle. James surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, dedicating himself to educating the children of Florence. Derek and Violet grew old together, their hair turning gray, their faces weathering with age, but their love never diminishing. They spent their later years sitting on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset and talking about their grandchildren, of which there were many. When Derek passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Violet grieved deeply, but took comfort in knowing they had been blessed with over 40 years together. She continued to keep a few hives herself, finding solace in the familiar work and the connection it provided to both her father and her husband. Violet lived another 5 years after Derek's death, long enough to see great-grandchildren born and to know that the legacy she and Derek had built would continue for generations. She spent her final days surrounded by family, her mind still sharp, her memories vivid and sweet. On her last morning, as the sun rose over the desert she had learned to love, Violet closed her eyes and smiled, thinking of Derek waiting for her, of the life they had shared, of the love that had sustained her through everything. She slipped away peacefully, her last thought a simple one: gratitude. The family buried her beside Derek under a cottonwood tree near where the first beehives had been placed all those years ago. On her gravestone, beneath her name and dates, they inscribed a simple phrase: "She brought sweetness to the desert." The beekeeping business continued under Daniel's guidance, and eventually his children's, becoming a Florence institution, and a testament to what 2 people with courage, determination, and love could build together. The story of the mail-order bride who brought beehives and the cowboy who found sweetness in more than honey became local legend, told and retold, inspiring others to take chances on love and to believe in second beginnings. And on warm summer evenings, when the desert air was thick with the scent of mesquite blossoms and the sound of bees returning home with the day's nectar, people in Florence would sometimes pause and remember Violet and Derek Navarro, whose love story had become as much a part of the town's history as the courthouse or the river or the mountains that rose purple in the distance. Their descendants still lived in the area, still kept bees, still told their children about great-great-grandmother Violet, who came from Pennsylvania with nothing but her father's beehives, and great-great-grandfather Derek, who gave her a home in his heart. The original adobe house was preserved, turned into a small museum dedicated to the history of beekeeping in Arizona, with photographs and tools and stories that kept their memory alive. And sometimes, on quiet mornings when the light was just right, visitors to the museum swore they could hear the ghost of laughter, see the shadow of two people walking hand in hand toward the beehives, their love eternal and their legacy sweeter than the finest honey ever harvested in the Arizona desert. The story of their love remained a beacon of hope, reminding everyone who heard it that sometimes the most unexpected journeys lead to the most extraordinary destinations, and that love, when nurtured with care and devotion, can bloom even in the harshest environments, creating sweetness that lasts for generations.